Welcome to Real Talk, where I give real answers to real questions from real worship leaders. If you are a real worship leader with a real question and you want a real answer, submit your question right here for a future episode, and I just might answer it. Got some good questions this week? Let's talk about it. I have a guy who thinks he is above the rest of us and that he can argue with anything I come up with, such as the songs I pick, or if I ask him to sing something special, he always comes up with a different song instead of the one I asked for. Just seems like he looks for anything I might have done wrong so he can tell me how to fix it. If I pick a song he doesn't like, he just won't sing it. I appreciate that this isn't actually a question. It's a frustrated statement, but I think it's a frustrated statement that a lot of worship leaders hold with problem people on their team. And this is what we have to realize, and this is a hard thing to say gracefully, but it's also the truth. And I feel like people don't want to accept this truth, but it is the truth, that there are leadership structures in the church. There are leadership structures in any organization. And as people who serve in that organization, we have to respect the leadership structure. Now, how the church leadership structure differs from, say, a corporate leadership structure is that by necessity, Christ has commanded us to lead as servant leaders. So we don't lead with a top-down rule of our worship ministries or for our pastors and elders, a top-down rule from the church. We lead by example. We lead by being Christ-like. We lead by being a servant to the people. We lead, you've often heard it said, we lead from behind, gently urging people. Paul always talks about, rebuke and reproof people with patience and kindness, with love in your heart, hoping that you'll bring them to repentance. That sounds like a Bible verse. I'm not sure if I'm actually quoting a Bible verse there or not. But in Paul's writings, in historical church leadership structure throughout the year, it is very clear that there are leadership structures in the church and they are to be respected. Not abused by the person in charge, but respected by the people who are being led by them. And that's what we have a problem with as leaders, is we don't want to step fully into that truth of that we are a leader, that we do have authority in our church. And I think part of it is that feels like an awkward thing to say. I think part of it is we don't want to take full responsibility for the things that we do. So if we say, well, I'm not really in charge, then we can just let things like this slide. And I'm not saying that you, whoever asked this question, is doing that, but I see this at large in the church. And let me assure you, there are leadership structures in the church, and that is okay. And the people in the church should respect those leadership structures. They should follow them if the leader is acting in a biblical way. And then they submit to those leaders in other decisions, knowing that that leader has been given that position for a specific reason, that they have a greater responsibility in their leadership than somebody who is just on the worship team has. And by the way, this isn't just like worship leaders are in charge of everything. Guess what? The whole leadership structure of the church, and I know that this just turned into a random conversation about leadership structures, but it's really the foundation of what you're asking. The whole leadership structure of the church is people submitting to other people. It is the congregation submitting to, ultimately the elders, but I think that there are some other intermediate leadership structures in there. But, it goes, let's say for the sake of argument here, it's the worship team member submitting to the worship team leader. Whoever's in charge, who has been given the position of leadership of the worship team members submit to that leadership. And guess what? The worship team leader, he submits to the pastor. And guess who the pastor and the elders in your church submit to? They submit to Christ. Christ is the head of the church. The Bible tells us he's given us, prophets, evangelists, teachers. I don't remember all the exact phrases that Paul uses, but he has placed leaders in the church, and so we must follow them. And so I want to give you permission when you ask this question to recognize that you are a leader and you have authority. Some people need to hear that. I'm not saying that we abuse that authority. I'm not saying that we just say, hey, I'm in charge and you need to listen to me. But it is perfectly valid to have a conversation with a worship team member and say, listen, I need you to respect the decisions that I make. I have the well-being of the entire church in my view, I'm trying to do what's best for the church and lead them the best way possible so that we constantly point them to the worthiness of God and provide them the opportunity to respond, because that is our job as people who lead worship in the church. And I need you to trust me as the leader that I'm making these decisions for a specific reason. They aren't arbitrary decisions, but I am making them. And I know that you don't always agree with them, but I need you. I need you to follow my leadership. And sometimes it takes having hard conversations like that, and that's okay. That's not the fun part about being a worship team leader, but if you have that role, and it is a firm role, and if you have that role and it is a firm role, if you have that, then you need to step into it fully and exercise some authority in your worship team leading. And I know that not everybody is comfortable with that, but that is what we are called to as leaders in the church, to sometimes say, listen, not I'm in charge and you must listen to me, but I'm leading the best that I possibly can, trying to lead this church, and I've been put in this position, I feel like, for a reason. And once again, I'm just thinking out loud here. I don't know if I would actually communicate it this way to someone. So don't go just regurgitate the words that I say here, but this is the sentiment. And I need you to trust the decisions that I make, that they are for the well-being of the church. So when what were the problems? When I pick a song, if I pick a song and I suggest that you sing it, like I'm picking that song for a specific reason, and that's the song that we're going to sing. If you don't want to sing the songs that I have picked for the service, then you can't be on the team anymore, because that's what we do. That's what we do. Now, a few caveats with that. I don't think you specifically said whether you were officially the worship team leader or not. If you aren't officially the worship team leader, then you don't have that authority. But if you are, you do. So that's the first thing. Recognize that you have authority. Number two, if this is a consistent problem, then get your pastor involved, because this is a pastoral issue, and this is something that not a lot of people understand. But if you have a pastoral problem, go to the elders in your church. And I use that because, technically we shouldn't just have a lead pastor who's in charge of everything. We should have a plurality of elders leading our church, but I know that not everybody does that. So go to the leaders in your church who are the elders. If that is a senior pastor, go to them and say, this is a pastoral issue that I need at least advice on, but potentially intervention on. If it is that big of a problem, don't blow things out of proportion either. And then I guess I should have put this one first. But number three, if you just haven't addressed this at all and you're just harboring this hatred in your heart, I don't know if it's hatred, but this frustration in your heart, and you've never addressed it with the person, the first step before you go to your pastor is to address the problem with the person who is causing the problem. And you walk up to them and say, hey, listen, when I pick these songs, these are the songs that we're going to do. And so I need you to lead these songs. And it's really frustrating whenever you constantly point out the things that you feel are wrong during worship rehearsal. We're all working together to create the best possible worship environment where people are edified and God is glorified on Sunday. And that's our aim. So let's work together instead of just critiquing each other. If you haven't had that conversation, you need to have that conversation first before you bring it to the pastor, or else you'll make your pastor frustrated because you haven't talked to the person. You're just going behind their back. All right. So go to them first. Let me put this in the correct order now. Go to them first. If they do not listen, I would have a second conversation with them. And that's when you bring up the leadership aspect of it. If they still don't listen, you might need to get your pastor involved, or at least get advice from your pastor on how to handle the situation. So don't be afraid to address the problem. Don't let it fester and grow any longer. Address it with this person. It will not be easy. It will not be comfortable, but you have to address it. You have to talk to them about it. Don't talk to me, who's some random guy online. Now you know what to do. Go tell them about it. How do I keep the musicians committed? They attend service as they want. Short question. I love it. How do I keep them committed? I think it really boils down, it's not like you influencing them, making them come to church on Sunday. First of all, it is an expectation that you set. If you want all the musicians on your worship team to be regular members of your church, which I don't think is wildly out of bounds by any stretch of the imagination, that is the expectation that I have for people on my worship team in my church, is that they would regularly attend church, and you have to define what that means for you. If these people are serving, let's say, and you don't specify obviously in your short question, but if these people are serving 3 Sundays out of the month and then they're gone like 1 Sunday out of the month, and then you're like, these people only come when they're serving, just recognize that they were there for 3 out of the 4 weeks of the month. So that is like, that's pretty committed in my mind. If they're only scheduled once or twice a month and then they never come apart from that, then yes, that is a problem. But that is an expectation that you have to set for your worship team members in the process where they join your worship team, and ingrain it into the culture of your worship team. And I think that this is something that so many people miss or have missed for the past 7, 8 years, however long they've been leading in ministry, and now they recognize the need to have these things in place. And they're like, how do I do it? Well, it starts at the foundation by you saying, okay, listen, I don't want to say a new rule, but this is the expectation, and every new worship team member should be handed a worship expectation sheet, a code of conduct, whatever you want to call it. I call mine a worship ministry overview because I think it's a little less intimidating than a code of conduct. In fact, I will link mine down in the description below, and you can see the kind of things that I talk about in my worship ministry overview code of conduct handout. So I'll link that down in the description below, but it must be in there. If this is of importance to you, it better be in the foundational piece of whatever it means to be a worship leader. So that is the first thing, is to build the foundation. Now, the problem arises, I want to set this new expectation, and the people on my worship team have not had that expectation set for them. How do I introduce that expectation to them? And that's where it gets complicated. Because now it is not just a momentary decision where you flip a switch. It is something that you have to teach them over 6 months to a year. And I really hate to plug my own product. You really rarely see me talk about the devotionals that I've written on this channel. I should probably talk about them more, but I save that for my email list, and I'll send out stuff occasionally to them. But I wrote a devotional a while ago now called We Are All Worship Leaders. In that devotional, I try to help raise up worship team members' understandings of what it means to be a worship team member. They aren't just there to play music on Sunday, but they are there to lead worship. And worship leading does not just take place on stage, it also takes place off stage. It takes place getting to know the people that you're leading. And so if you miss those pieces where you are never leading worship off stage by being in the congregation, participating in congregational worship, and you are never building relationships with people outside of you being on the stage on Sunday morning, it's going to be really hard to lead worship. But a lot of worship leaders just think that, or a lot of worship team members just think that they're up there to play music. Maybe they wouldn't say that out loud, but ultimately that's what it boils down to. And so in order to fix problems like this, we need to help them understand their true role as worship team members. And so that's why I wrote the devotional. Like I said, I don't always, maybe this is the first time you ever heard about that, but I don't like to talk about it a ton on this channel, but I just did, so I'll link it down below. So set the expectation, and gradually over time, through your devotional time, whether that's through the devotional I wrote or not, constantly communicate this idea to them that, hey, if you are here, you aren't just here to play music, you are here to lead the people in worship, and that means being a part of the church. So we can't just come 2 weeks out of the month for half the year and think that we'll be able to lead worship when we step up on stage. So if you want help for setting those expectations, I'll link my own handout that I used for my worship ministry down below in the worship team toolkit. I'll also give you the application form that I use when people want to join my worship team. So super helpful stuff there. Check that out down below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.